Welcome everyone to the International Women's Day event for 2024. This year, we really wanted to celebrate the achievements of women in academia, understanding that they've overcome major systemic challenges in order to make significant contributions to each of their respective fields. My name is Frances Forrester, and I'm from the Office of Technology Development, and I'm representing the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee of Research. I figured we would start off the panel with first an introduction from each of our faculty members. They're much better at explaining their research than I would be. So they'll each have an opportunity to share their very interesting work with you. And then we have 3 questions that we've curated from the audience in advance that we'll be discussing that talks about career opportunities, what sort of mentorship they had, just highlighting how they've managed to reach the point that they have today. So yeah, without further ado, Deborah, if you would like to start.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Debbie Carr. I'm a sociology professor and director of the Center for Innovation here at BU. And I will hit my timer so I don't go over 4 minutes. And so rather than talking about a specific research project I'm doing, I thought I would give kind of a big picture of the research I do, but also the research support activities that I'm engaged in, because that might be something that's of value to the audience. And then I'll also talk just a little bit about kind of how I got here, meaning to BU, because there might be some, again, little nuggets in there that are helpful for people at various stages of their career. So I will share my screen. Let's see if I can get this to work. No matter how many times we do this, we always mess up. Great. So here is me. I'm a sociologist, and I actually don't see too many sociologists on the call. I think we probably have more people who are in the biomedical sciences. So I'll give kind of a big picture summary of what I do. I study aging, and particularly social factors in aging. So the ways that most notably social class, gender, family relationships affect a whole range of experiences in later life, specifically mental health, physical health, economic precarity, and then how it is that older adults manage the struggles of aging, whether it is the struggles of adaptation to climate change, how we deal with death, specifically how we prepare for our own death, or how we manage the emotional fallout of the death of others. How families manage disability. So really, it's a range of topics that are focused on how it is that the experiences that we have over the life course, really from childhood through adulthood, shape the experiences in later life. And so that's a very, very big picture of the kinds of research I do. But I thought I also would just give kind of a couple of examples of some recent books that I've done, and then some editorial work that I've done, because I think those are things that I've been able to do that support others, and specifically other women scholars. I've written a bunch of books and a bunch of articles. I list just a couple here. Golden Years is focused on economic inequalities in later life. And the specific hook of that book is that we know that poverty leads to adverse outcomes with respect to health and well-being and emotional security. But I argue that the intersection of economic precarity and aging bodies actually has this multiplicative effect. So if you have a home that's not particularly safe, doesn't have safe air conditioning, that's not pleasant when you're 18, but it's all the worse if someone has biological aging that renders them vulnerable. So I talk about kind of the intersection of class and age. I've written about aging more broadly in these 2 books that you can see here, an edited volume, and then another book about population aging. I do a lot of media work, because I think it's important for lay people and policymakers to understand the experiences of older adults. You can see that news article there. But something else I've done in the kind of research adjacent space that I'm proud of is being able to make opportunities for other scholars. So I've been editor-in-chief of 2 peer-reviewed journals, Journal of Gerontology, which is yellow over here, and then Journal of Health and Social Behavior, which is in red. And it's been great to be able to nurture other scholars as they make their publications, through the pipeline. Also on PI of several different large NIH-funded surveys or Department of Labor-funded surveys, including National Longitudinal Survey of Youth. So that's a big background. Let's see, my next slide. If you, let's see, I'll do one more slide here because it's not turning. I'm going to go to the next page on my slide here. Shoot, are you all seeing the second page here? No, okay, the path to BU. I'm just putting this up here real quickly because again, it might be of interest to other people. I am not from an academic family or even a white collar family. And I know lots of academics were. I'm from a blue collar family in Cranston, Rhode Island. And so academia was not a place that I necessarily expected to end up. I had a detour from high school to college. I worked as a reporter in New York for a few years, having nothing to do with sociology before I was extraordinarily fortunate to have a series of tenure track jobs at R1 schools. And so for anybody who took a detour, that's actually a good thing. I learned to write really quickly as an academic. And so for many of us, those skills that we acquired outside of academia can come back and be really supportive of us and help us actually to make opportunities for the generations that come after us who also don't follow this linear path from undergraduate to grad school. So I will stop sharing and I look forward to hearing about my co-panelists' research.
Thanks so much, Deborah. Ayse?
Thank you. My name is Ayse Coskun. I'm a professor in the Electrical and Computer Engineering department here in the College of Engineering. I've been at Boston University for 15 years at this point. I am also the director of SAIS, which is the Center for Information and Systems Engineering. I've held that position close to 2 years now. And I am also the interim associate dean for research and faculty development in the College of Engineering. And we can talk about the pros and cons of holding multiple hats. And so my research is on efficient and sustainable computing. Broadly speaking, my team works on making computing better, faster, and cheaper. And that means a lot of things. That means making computing more reliable, lower cost, lower energy. And I like this quote that computing is like potato chips. There is never enough. So there is always a rising demand of computing, no matter how great our current computer systems are. So my team actively works on how to meet this demand in the most efficient way. We look into new technology trends and how to integrate them, how to simulate them, how to evaluate them early on, to design the necessary systems, software, and architectures for these future computing systems. We are very interdisciplinary in terms of our research. We apply methods in automation, intelligence, and machine learning. We are cross-cutting across what we call the stack of computing, from software layers all the way to hardware implementation. Like I was saying, our main goal is making computing efficient and more sustainable going forward, going from smaller scale embedded and mobile computers all the way to large scale data centers that are consuming a lot of energy. So that's what I do. Happy to elaborate more if there's interest. And in terms of technical training, I received my master's and PhD degrees from University of California, San Diego in computer science and engineering. And right after finishing my PhD degree, literally 3 days after finishing my PhD degree, I was going to work here. So that's pretty much the academic path. Prior to that, I completed my undergraduate education in electronics engineering back in Turkey at Sabancı University. And so in terms of the other things, basically how my path brought me to being the director of SAIS and the associate dean interim currently for research and faculty development. I mean, I've done well in terms of research, but beyond that, I think when opportunities came up, I put my foot in the door. And I think that played a role in opening some additional doors for me. So again, like we can talk more if there's interest, but I'll keep it brief. And thank you. Looking forward to all the other panelists and questions.
Thanks so much, Ayse. Mary?
Hi, I'm Mary Dunlop. I'm an associate professor in biomedical engineering at Boston University. And I am also the associate chair for graduate studies for our department. And most recently, I'm taken on the role of co-director for a new NSF-funded national research traineeship training grant in biological feedback control systems. So I'll tell you about my academic path in a little bit, but I'll just give you a brief view into what we do for research in my lab. So we use principles and approaches from engineering to study bacterial systems. And in particular, we're focused on studying how genetically identical cells can exhibit markedly different behaviors, even if they share the same genetic code. And we use this to study antibiotic resistance, to think about how to improve bioproduction, and also to engineer entirely novel function in cells. And I'll show just one slide that has a few movies on it, just to give you a sense of what this looks like. So let me share here. So what you're looking at here is are microfluidic devices where there are E. coli bacteria growing, and they're constrained in this device to grow in a single layer. And then on the top and bottom of this, there are these deep media channels where we can flow in nutrients. But we also introduce in these experiments different stressors like antibiotics in this example. And so that plot on the top shows that in this movie that I'll show you, we add a really short pulse of a lethal dose of carbenicillin. So carbenicillin is a beta-lactam antibiotic. So it's in the same class as things that you may have heard of, like ampicillin or penicillin. Typically what happens is, like this movie on the left-hand side, we add a red dye alongside the antibiotic so you can tell when it goes in. So these cells are growing well, and then we introduce the carbenicillin, and you can see that they're starting to die. There are these lysed remnants of the cells there in the chamber, but by the end of this movie, everything's been killed, which is, of course, what you want to have happen if you're treating a bacterial infection. And we set up these experiments in these microfluidic devices where you have many, many chambers like this in the same device, so we can do lots of replicates. And this other movie here shows another thing that can happen, which is that these cells are growing well here. We introduce the carbenicillin, and then they mostly die, but there's this one cell in the middle. And now that the antibiotics have been removed, it is able to grow and divide. And then very quickly, within the course of just a few hours, it recolonizes this microfluidic trap, which is, of course, very problematic if you're treating an infection, and has all sorts of implication for recurrent and recalcitrant infections. And so let me just stop sharing. But I think people commonly think of bacteria as these really incredibly simple organisms, and we're just fascinated by all the ways that they're not. And understanding how this cell-to-cell heterogeneity has implications for health, for bioproduction, and revealing like why this is happening, and then also how we can control it. So that's just a brief view of my research area. In terms of my academic path, I started my undergrad degree. I went to Princeton and majored in mechanical aerospace engineering and minored in computer science. And then I went to Caltech for grad school, also for mechanical engineering. I did a really brief postdoc in the Bay Area and working on bioenergy. And then I moved to the University of Vermont, and that was my first faculty career position. I stayed there for 5 or 6 years, and then I moved to Boston University, and I've been here since 2017.
Thanks, Mary. Suchi, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to first get started, then I'll show you a few of my slides. I'm Sucharita Gopal. I'm in the Department of Earth and Environment. I know many of you who are right here, so let me sort of pitch and say what I'm doing and where I'm headed in terms of, can you see my presentation, please? Oops.
We can only see the top of your screen, just the
Okay, so
PowerPoint header.
let me move it up. Thank you. So I wanted to tell you that at BU, there are many, many centers, and I'm affiliated with many of these centers, which do like incredible work. So I was going to get started with that and show you that there's the Center for Remote Sensing, Institute for Sustainable Energy, Global Development Policy Center, and on and on. Each one of these centers does something slightly different, but at the same time, it provides you a very good home to find different partners and different colleagues across the campus. So currently, my research consists of 2 grants. One is from the Department of Energy, Department of Interior, which is to do with offshore wind energy that I'm writing and co-producing with Professor Les Kaufman in biology. So this is a program that's almost complete, and we need to provide the national framework in terms of environmental assessment that the Department of Interior would like to do, given the fact that the US is planning to get a lot of offshore wind. The second grant I have is a National Science Foundation grant. We are one of the many partners of what's called the Coastal Copes Grant. And this is a very large grant for 5 years. And it's meant to look at what's called convergence research. That's a term that NSF is now using to talk about multidisciplinary, transdisciplinary understanding to solve societal problems. As you know, coral reefs, coastal areas with sea level rise, there's a lot happening as a result of direct impact of climate change. And part of this grant is to study not just the biological, climatological processes happening that's making the impact, but to understand societal response. And the societal response includes multiple stakeholders, including people who are generally not even consulted for any of this planning. So we are looking at diversity, inclusion, and justice in this type of grant. I also have a couple of other grants which are very interesting from NSF, and that is, traveling with a bunch of graduate students to places like Indonesia. We were in France last year in the summer, taking measurements along the coast, looking again at things like sea level rise and hazards, all related with climate change. So these are very interesting projects, especially since they involve a great many graduate students, not just from BU, but from across the US. So there's a lot of mentoring opportunities. There's a lot of interactions with students because we are out in the field doing lots of field measurements. So that's proved to be very interesting, especially meeting graduate students from elsewhere in the US and understanding their problems, their issues, and how they are dealing with their careers, and providing them advice if they wanted. There is also another center at Boston University, which is run by IMAP at the business school. And this particular grant looks at sustainable finance. A lot of what we've done so far is transforming science into what is called action and policy. And nobody ever listens to you in terms of you put out the policy, you say this matches SDG, the Sustainable Development Goal outlined by the UN to help women, to provide safe drinking water, to provide clean air, and so on. What I found out in the last 20 years of my work in all these different regions of the world, the only thing that seems to make a difference is finance. And this is called sustainable finance. And it is given by players like the World Bank, Bank of China, looking at different, investment vehicles. And some of it can even include companies wanting to invest and buy carbon credits. So if anybody is interested in carbon credits, I'd be happy to go in because that's an instrument that we have. And of course, there's a lot of greenwashing, and one needs to understand how to navigate this using perfect data, or at least robust data. Coming to the data issue, spatial data that we collect, including satellite data, is all geospatial in nature, which means it includes a latitude, longitude, and those are the kinds of data pieces that you need to model climate change and to look across the globe on any particular process or phenomenon. So we do a lot of spatializing at multiple spatial scales to understand things like greenhouse gas emission, to understand the impacts on health, what particular zip code is going to have an increased incidence of skin cancer because there's going to be more UV rays reaching faster and faster. There's a lot of sociology components also thrown in because, like Deb was pointing out, it's the aging of the population, people not really going to the Sunbelt states anymore. There's plenty of sun in Boston. People are not migrating so much in terms of the Sunbelt migration. So we could talk about those kinds of issues with the data. And there is another interesting connection that I have with the Sargent College, doing a lot of work on public health. And I will tell you what we are doing there. Obviously, one of the projects I'm working on is called Sex for Fish, where women actually trade sex in order to get fish to sell and make profit. And this is a project in Kenya, and it's funded by the GDP, the Global Development Policy Center. And I'll be happy to talk about it. I also did a paper on opioids. Again, I can talk about it if you want, using what are called spatial panel models. We've done a lot of work in our department with several experts. Nathan Phillips is one of the people that I work with to understand gas leaks all across the Northeast and tree mortality. And by now we've passed 2 or 3 students, both with PhDs and masters, in this type of analysis of looking at gas leaks. And this is important because natural gas is supposed to be a transition fuel for a path to net zero. And there are so many leaks, and methane is more dangerous than carbon dioxide and any other greenhouse gas. So nothing can be done without colleagues and students. So I want to show you my network as of 2023 and 2024. I mentioned that I work a lot with biology department, Professor Les Kaufman and Ethan Dial, who's an assistant research professor. My student Mira is working with me on several projects. And we also have a researcher who's like right outside, but works with us on all types of what are called coupled human natural systems models, Roel Bauman in Vermont. I also work with Josh Pitts, who's a research associate at the GDP. And there are 2 students, one who's a postdoc, and Ruth Toshenwald, who's a computer science, data science master student who's working with me right now, and Yashang Ma, who's a postdoc at Sargent, working on public health. And then I have this whole connection with Megali Koch, who's at the Center for Remote Sensing. And we've done a lot of work abroad, traveling with these graduate students that I said, I told you about, and working with Indonesian colleagues. Professor Mohammed Elmi comes to mind. And I mentioned Lawrence Weir at Sargent College, who I work with on Sex for Fish and several public health projects. And I also have an appointment at the University of Vienna at the business school with Professor Manfred Fischer, and that's where I did my opioids. And I also do all kinds of sustainability related issues because I'm at the business school there, and we talk about supply chains and scope 3 emissions in particular. And there's a lot that I can talk about, but I'm going to stop there and see if anybody has questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Suchi. Rabia?
Sure. Hello, everyone. I'm Rabia Yazicigil. I'm an assistant professor in the Electrical and Computer Engineering department here at BU, and I will tell you a few things about our research. Let me just share my screen. You should be able to see it now. Okay. I'm leading the Wireless Integrated Systems and Extreme Circuits group, WISE Circuits for short. And you're seeing actually some of the pictures of my students with me. And what we are doing is we are designing energy-efficient custom hardware for systems related to human health, environment, sustainability, and communications broadly. And I think the most important thing is we embrace interdisciplinary collaboration. So we work with domain experts from biology, from information theory, from security to design our custom hardware more suitable for those different applications to impact the society. And so most of these projects, as I mentioned, are very collaborative. So we work with many people from biological engineering department as well, biomedical engineering department here at BU, as well as I have collaborators from MIT, from mechanical engineering and biological engineering departments. And we are building something called cyber secure biological systems. What are those systems? So these are, you can think of this as living sensors. They are built from genetically engineered biological systems, but they're augmented with electronics. And they can achieve environmental monitoring, soil monitoring, water monitoring, food quality monitoring, sustainable manufacturing, and many other things. And what they do is they use these living sensors, the biological systems, for better sensitivity and specificity, while they use the electronics for reliable data generation and communication. And just to give you an example of one of these
systems, we recently built an ingestible capsule for gastrointestinal tract monitoring to achieve non-invasive and continuous monitoring. I actually have the capsule here with me. It's this tiny capsule that you swallow. And the idea is that it uses these genetically engineered bacterial sensors that can actually detect short-lived disease biomarkers in the gastrointestinal tract. And when they detect that inflammation or the bleeding in the gastrointestinal tract, they produce a light signal. And we have custom electronics that detects that light signal and converts that to a wireless signal that's communicated outside the body. And of course, as you can imagine, it has to be small so that you can easily swallow, so it's safe. At the same time, it has to be very low power, so it doesn't require a large battery, or it can actually harvest energy from the gastrointestinal tract. And now we are also applying these type of cyber-secure biological sensors to other problems and environmental monitoring with Doug Densmore, with Mo Khalil and Wilson Wong. We are looking at how do you achieve real-time monitoring of toxic chemicals in wastewater. So we are creating these wireless biosensor networks, not just electronic sensors, but they're combined with these biological systems to achieve distributed wastewater surveillance in a low-cost way and fast and scalable. So, and just to switch gears and tell you a bit about a different part of work, again, that requires another interdisciplinary collaboration with people from information theory, coding theory, and mathematics background. So I do also work on wireless communications. How do we make wireless communications better? Here, specifically, we focus on data decoders, information encoding and decoding. And just to give you an analogy about this project, what do we do is, this is an analogy about people and languages. So let's say that I have a person A who has thoughts, and they agree on speaking in a specific language here in English. When I say cat, the person B receives this information with their ears, and they decode it with their brain, and they can, due to the noise in the environment, they can hear it as bat. And if they hear it as bat, there's no way that they can decode that information. But if I say cat and meow, if I add the meow to it, then actually you can use that additional context to be able to decode the information correctly and capture that I was trying to say cat. So similarly, when you think about digital information exchange, the paragraphs in your email or the 3D graphics in the virtual reality cases, what happens is we do a similar encoding and decoding. But what has been done traditionally is for each language, in a sense, for each coding scheme, there's a specific decoder that we use today. And that actually increases hardware complexity. It requires standardization. That's why we have 5G standard that's telling us what type of coding scheme to use. What we are working on in my group is through co-design of algorithms and hardware is to design these universal decoders. We call them guessing random additive noise decoding. They can basically decode any coding scheme without requiring to agree in advance which coding scheme you're going to use. So that also future-proofs the device. In the future, you don't need to go change the decoder if there's a new type of a coding scheme. And it also provides you reduced hardware complexity, better energy efficiency, and etc. So again, this is showing that by co-designing algorithms and hardware, how you can enable energy efficient, low latency wireless communications. So just, I guess, to recap, we do work on many different applications. They all have different requirements, but I think the unique thing is they all require custom hardware chips to enable those science or technology possible. And my group, thanks to actually my students, we are able to work on these interdisciplinary areas with our collaborators. And looking forward to discussing more with everyone.
Thanks, Rabia. We'll now start the Q&A session. So I'll go right into it and start with the first question curated from the audience. Who were the mentors and allies that positively impacted your career journey thus far? How did you engage with them, particularly in traditionally male-dominated fields? And we'll start off with Mary.
Sure, thanks. Yeah, so I can talk about a few different mentoring experiences. I've of course had many mentors, and I'm in a pretty. I come from a mechanical engineering background, so it's been sort of more male dominated, but I've also had many wonderful female mentors as well. My PhD advisor is somebody that was a really strong mentor for me, and I was reflecting about this, thinking about what to say, and I honestly don't think there was anything specific about him being a good mentor for women that he did as a PhD mentor. He was just a good mentor in general. But I had the honor of as I've gotten more senior in my career, I've sat on various committees and panels with him, and it's actually been really interesting to watch him kind of work quietly behind the scenes on this. And it's something that I really didn't appreciate at the time. But one thing I've watched him do is very sort of patiently advocate for representation of women and other people coming from underrepresented minorities, by just kind of bringing it up in for example, in organizing a conference, like thinking about who to invite, and pointing out that we're only inviting people from California, or why is it only men on the list, and so I think he's done a really, really nice job, and I've kind of learned a lot from watching him. Like I organized a conference, and we gathered a bunch of names for potential speakers, and I added a column on it that was is this a man or a woman? And it was sort of shocking how much even just that was enough to make sure that people thought about it. So there are lots of kind of little things that I've learned from him along the way. I've had some formal mentors, at the University of Vermont, I had an official mentor, and at BU, I had as a junior faculty member, I had two official mentors. And I guess what I'll say there is that I've always been really good about just sort of regularly checking in and meeting with them. And I mention that because I've seen a lot of people who don't use this to great effect. They sort of assume they're out there and that they could call on them. But I think it's actually a really wonderful opportunity to every 6 months just sort of sit down and have a conversation about how things are going. And my experience has been that people are very happy to offer advice and chat with you, and also to share in your struggles as you explain what's not going well. I think the other thing that I maybe say is that it's been interesting also to recognize that not everybody is the right mentor for everything. And so, although I have two great faculty mentors, one person or two people doesn't cover the whole spectrum of all that you might need mentorship on. And so, for example, one of my faculty mentors is an absolutely amazing researcher. And so when I talk with him about, problems in the research group or how to think about grant renewals, he has fantastic advice, but his advice on service is really just all about artful dodging to get out of doing anything. And that doesn't resonate with me at all. So I look elsewhere for mentorship in that space. The best teachers are not necessarily the people who are your research mentors. So, I've asked, I'll regularly ask, undergraduates, who do you think the best professors in the department are? And then they'll definitely tell you. And then I'll go ask them about teaching. And so I think I've been, I think recognizing that different people are good at different things, and then seeking out mentorship that way has been a very effective strategy for me. I'll stop there.
Ayse?
Yes, so for mentoring, broadly speaking, I had a lot of people that I learned from, and in sometimes unexpected ways. So I thought about this, and I'll mention a few specific people, but I think it's important to think about this broader opportunity of having these small conversations. You never know who is going to, give you a piece of advice or an example that's going to make a difference for you. So I think that's a side of networking that we don't think of much. We think about selling our research or, making connections about collaborations. But I think these chit chats at conferences or in our work life is also important. So my advisor, who is also a woman, Tayana Rosing, was not only a successful example in a male-dominated field. I'm in electrical and computer engineering. I was in the computer science and engineering department. But also she gave a lot of practical advice, which was really important for me. An example would be in for instance, interviewing. She was the first one to tell me when I was going to interview for potential academic jobs, like you are also interviewing them to see if this is a place that you want to be. Because again, like somebody coming fresh out of the PhD program, I was more focused on making sure everybody likes me. And so she gave these parameters of like, look at the department. Is this a place that you want to spend a lot of time in? And I think that was very valuable. I appreciate that. I think I learned a lot, probably similar to everybody, from my mother, but particularly persistence is a skill that I think it's probably one of the most important skills in this business in academia. And I think I learned a lot of that from my mother. And a professor in my undergraduate times back in Sabancı University in Turkey, Yusuf Leblebici, who was a professor at that time, eventually became a collaborator when I was doing my PhD, eventually became a mentor, eventually became a collaborator in different ways again. So building relationships like that, where there's somebody that you learn a lot from in various stages of your career, is incredibly valuable. And you know, it's important to, if it's a male-dominated field, it's important to appreciate the fact that a lot of your mentors will be men. And it's important to find the ones who are going to give you critical advice, especially at turning career points, like when I was changing advisors during my PhD, when I applied to BU, and you know, when I stepped into some administrative positions. These were great times for me to have a chat with this mentor, who's experienced, who's seen a lot, and who knows me well, right? So I think building relationships is really important. One thing to highlight is that in addition to mentors, what's called sponsors, people who are going to support you, is also important. For instance, Professor David Etienza at EPFL in Switzerland. I've been, initially, he was my collaborator. Eventually, he's slightly more senior than me. But he had a lot of roles, basically. So he pulled me into things, like he recommended me to committees. He asked me to participate as deputy editor-in-chief in this journal that we are currently managing together. So he basically put my name in a lot of places, not just as a favor to me. I was doing a good job too, I guess. But it's just like there are people like that who care about bringing good people and a diverse set of people into positions. And it's also important to find them. I think I appreciate that. And the last thing to mention is that I think there's a lot of important peer mentoring, or maybe peer plus, like somebody who's a little bit more senior than you. And I have this group of friends from college, for instance, that we stayed in touch, and we gave each other a lot of practical career advice over the years. And even though like I went into academia, they went into industry, still, you know, a lot of the career challenges were similar. And we learned from each other. We gave each other advice. We kind of tossed ideas about, like, I have this situation, how do I handle this? So that was on a day-to-day basis so valuable. So I think not just for mentorship, not just looking up to more senior people, but also to your peers is really important. Thank you.
Deborah?
Great. I second everything you've heard already. As a social scientist, we don't really have lab-based sciences, so my remarks might be a little bit different. But I was just incredibly fortunate to have wonderful mentors, not only as a graduate student, then as an assistant professor. Sociology is not particularly male-dominated. In fact, it now skews more female than male. But I'm a quantitative social scientist. I use big surveys and run statistical models. So all of my early mentors were men. And it really just didn't bear on my experience at all, because I wanted to learn these skills. I wanted to learn data analysis skills and how to write grants and how to write articles. And they all were just extraordinarily helpful in that regard. And so trying to think of a couple of tips that I've taken away from some with my main graduate school mentor, who really showed me how to engage graduate students in research. And even if you don't have a large grant, you can bring 2 or 3 students in and work with them as a group and learn about co-authorship and have them learn from one another and really have a sense of community. And I think that's something that is stunningly important in graduate school, because often you're far away from your roots and your friends and family. And so setting up a work environment to foster those relationships among peers, and yet at the same time providing enough guidance so everybody has clear direction on what they're doing and can glean skills from that work. other messages that I've gotten from male mentors, which I think male mentors might have been particularly good at giving, is how to sing out the strengths of your own work. And this is something I've struggled at from the get-go. We've all had to write a statement, in my work, I do this, and it feels so arrogant. And I struggled with that, everything from writing job market letters to my first publication to tenure statements. And some of my amazing mentors would say, like, what's interesting about this? Like, you need to sing out what is interesting, what is novel about your work. And it doesn't have to be arrogant. It really is, you know more about your work than anybody else. So you need to be the one to show the grant reviewers, the tenure reviewers, the job market people, what it is that you're doing that's new and different and builds upon prior work. And I think it kind of pushed me out of my timidity and trying to be like, well, my work maybe does this well using we. Never hide behind we unless you are a team or you're the Queen of England. But they helped me to say, I do such and such. So I think that was a really valuable lesson that I got from some of my mentors. Other important lessons, again, that's kind of related, is again, really knowing your work so well that it helps you to publish it. So I'll give one example. My master's thesis, the first paper I ever wrote, I was getting all ready to send it to a journal. I was all excited. And what do I get in the mail? A journal with an article that I thought was exactly the same as my paper. And of course I freak out and I talked to one of my mentors. And he kept saying, read the paper, read it really closely, and you will see those precise methodological or theoretical ways in which your work is different, and you can actually use that other paper as a springboard. And so sometimes that kind of reality check without the emotion, right, just kind of being objective was something that I learned. Like, if you have a panic attack about something in academia, read the other study, dig back into your work in an objective way and figure out what you're doing that's new and different. So that was really helpful for me. And then just kind of one other last one, is not to go on too long, is kind of making opportunities for other people. I've been very lucky to serve on, high visibility NIH panels or speak on a panel because one of these senior mentors either, I don't know why, either they were too busy or they really were generative and said, hey, give this slot to this then young woman, now old woman, on these panels. So I think that making opportunities for the younger generation is helpful. But another thing I learned was actually as an administrator, right? As an administrator, you need to put people to work in ways that is sometimes difficult. And so one of my more senior mentors really underscored, when you're working with people, always learn what their unique strengths are and what they want to do. If someone seems like they're kind of, petering out in their career, find out what is important to you and do that matchmaking, whether it's junior people or very senior people, so everybody feels that their strengths are being recognized and being put to work. And those are skills that they had just from decades of experience that I was lucky to absorb and hopefully have been able to enact. So those are just kind of some snippets of lessons I've been fortunate to learn through these mentors who had longstanding presence in the field.
Yeah, thanks to all of our panelists for answering the first question. In the interest of time, I think that, and since we do want to hear from everyone, I'm going to skip to the more thematic question, which I'll present now. Research forms a global community, and many of our audience members either come from an international background, they know someone who came to the US as a student, or they have research interests that are related to diversity topics. What advice do you have for women of various backgrounds coming into their roles at BU? And how has diversity impacted your role at BU? And we'll start with Suchi.
Thank you. That was so nice to hear everybody talk about their mentors. So when I first arrived at BU, I've been here for more than 30 years. Hard to sort of, make note of the fact that I arrived just as a graduate student and a one-year postdoc in Europe. So I've been here a long time, and I've seen a lot in terms of women and their place in various departments. So for a long time, there was another senior person in my department when I first arrived, and she had like many different roles just because she was one of those lenient types, right? So we all know what it means. As we tend to take more tasks than what we ought to. And she was doing that. But anyway, she was in and out of the department, tried to help me a lot. But I found another mentor in the Department of Math and Cognitive and Neural Systems who really guided me as I was going through my tenure. So I reflect back on those days, not having any women mentors, but you had to be pretty aggressive, network, and get to know all kinds of information from men too. And in my department, there were one or two very senior professors who did sort of play the role of mentoring and help me out. But, speaking of gender roles, over the period of time, I realized for a long time, there were very few women in many other departments. And I used to work cross-disciplinary across many departments, and all of the men would send their female graduate students to me because they would have some problem that they couldn't address. This was before all the protocols were put in place that you need to pick up the phone and call somebody who can advise them better, right? Those days, we didn't have all those connections. So, you would have all these women come to your office and they would be crying, and you had to help them try to navigate their, understand what exactly they were facing. So, there were always solutions to see. And BU has come a long way, as have several other institutions, in having more women. It is so important to have women in every department at every level, because we just have to relate better to our female graduate students because their challenges are somewhat different than the men. So having said that, these days, I see it's very interesting. We have inclusion, we have gender sort of issues, and yet at the same time, there are certain things that I think is part of our culture, our expectations of what women should be and what they ought to do and things like that. A couple of weeks ago, I came across a case where this professor who was coming up for something, I won't mention what rank or anything, was offering or doing too much service. None of the men around her wanted her to step back from the service because it was beginning to hurt her profile in terms of her research. So things like that every once in a while set me off thinking about what kind of advice and what kind of things we ought to do as an institution to guide women. And I think I'm so glad we are meeting here and Gloria is here. So there's a lot that one can do. It's not simple a question of mentoring and being an advisor to track the paths to tenure. It's also helping women in so many other ways that, it's things like, even childcare or, relationships, all those things. We've had couples come to the department and usually they can't find a good enough match for the husband, and many of them have left the department. So this dual couple problem is very, very real, and we really need to address those kinds of issues to make sure that we sort of incorporate all the concerns of female faculty. So I'm going to stop here, see if people have questions, and I'm so glad Gloria is here listening to us.
Thanks, Suchi. Rabia?
Sure. I guess people already shared great advice, but I will share some things maybe that helped me in the last few years of my role at BU. I think one thing that helped me the most is seeking advice and asking questions is one of the greatest learning experiences. I already learned so much from all the panelists that shared their experiences because everyone comes from very diverse knowledge and backgrounds. And I think collaborating, learning from each other within this type of a diverse community, what strengthens all of us, the institution also as a whole. I would say while it's important to do our homework and seek for advice, I think ultimately trusting our gut instinct is key. I actually got this advice from my mentor, Ayse Coskun, who is also one of the panelists. And I think another thing that has been helpful for me is being flexible, open to be able to take on new challenges, even when I feel unprepared. That actually helped me with the growth. And personally, I find that the interdisciplinary work could be rewarding in terms of this because it pushes me out of my comfort zone. It enables me to learn new things and communicate more effectively with individuals from various backgrounds. And I would say, I think the last thing is investing in relationships, whether these could be friendships, mentors, collaborators, is very important. It's what we are doing is all about people at the end. especially working with students from very diverse backgrounds is incredibly fulfilling because it has a multiplying effect. By educating students, you're amplifying your impact when they go and influence their fields and also people around them. So I think prioritizing people over anything is the best thing that we do as part of our job. I think that's all from my side.
Thanks. And now I suppose the eternal question, something that came up in the audience discussions quite frequently. Within a few words, and this is open for all the panelists, can you please speak to juggling demands from your personal life with self-care, health, and your careers?
I can jump in really quickly. So I have two kids, and I think I just wanted to share one thing as an example, and I'm sure many of us have this experience. But I think generally being a mother has made me a better faculty member, despite its challenges. But the one thing that I'll share is that there's one of my favorite parenting books is a book called How to Talk So Your Kids Will Listen and Listen So Your Kids Will Talk, which is something that I learned a lot from in terms of interacting with my kids. But I have to say it's been just like one of the best books I've ever read in terms of talking to anybody. So there have been pieces of advice in there, although it's aimed at elementary school kids, I've like used it to have really effective conversations with graduate students, with my department chair, with people, and really it just kind of talks about like the kind of core elements of like listening and appreciating what people are saying, and so there are little things like that have come in that have just been incredibly important. And I think it's tempting to always compare my life and the productivity kind of pre-kids with like the productivity post-kids, but there's no world in which those two things like could combine for the best productivity plus having the kids. Like the alternative universe is like me not having kids, being more productive, but kind of like grumpy because I didn't have the kids in some way. So I think it's useful to not try to like imagine worlds that don't exist, but work within the structure that you have. Yeah.
So I could jump in to say a few things. I have a small child now; he's almost 5, and most of my early career, I did not have a child, so I see the difference now that in terms of the load and the need to juggle better. But there's always some juggling, like we have busy lives. So I want to acknowledge that it's not solely having kids, which is a major factor in how it affects you, but there's always a lot of juggling. I think what I learned is to determine what's needed most. And I think I accepted the fact that, at times I will feel under-supported. Like the support is not enough. I'm about to go crazy with all the things that I have to do, kind of feeling. I think it happens quite a bit, and it happens more in certain periods, but it happens a lot to a lot of women, especially. So I think I'll repeat the one piece of advice that somebody more senior gave to me. She's actually currently the electrical engineering department chair of MIT, also Özdağlar. I ran into her a couple of years ago, and we were talking about something, and then it came to kids and stuff, and she said this: get support, hire support. Even if you don't have money, borrow money and then still hire support. I think it's it's like what people would take out of that could vary a lot, but I think that's important to acknowledge the fact that just I won't be able to do it alone, right? So I need either higher support or family support or some kind of support, and it's important to determine what's most important for me and then get some help in that. I think it might sound obvious, but it's not obvious when you are in it. We are trying to do a lot of things by ourselves. So this could mean like household chores to assistance at work, and that could mean a lot of things, right? So I think essentially that support is needed. I think I would say like maybe one step further, like get support. If you don't have it, fight for it. Like, fight for the support.
I will jump in and maybe share something personal too. I mean, I guess for me, one of the toughest thing I had to go through in the last few years is dealing with infertility and going through IVF. And that's not something people typically talk about as openly. And it actually hit me harder than I thought emotionally. And trying to juggle like my job as an assistant professor while also dealing with the ups and downs of the fertility treatments. Felt like almost having two full-time jobs at the same time. And I think what helped me is having, of course, a good support network outside of work and also at work. I mean, I think people in the department also, the people I shared with, has been very supportive and understanding. And it helped me go through those hard times. But it is, I mean, I think asking for support and trying to fight for your support is very important, as Ayse said also.
So I'm going to sort of add in. My son, of course, is now grown up, is in the medical school. But when he was in the middle school and in the daycare situation right after school, I always had to rush back before the daycare center closed at 6. And we live in the suburbs. And so it's like pretty hard commute at that time of the evening to make it back home. I've always had my neighbors, you know, many women who were the substitute mothers who would sign up and pick him up. So it was really, really nice to see all of them when he finally graduated, and to thank all these mothers, because without their support, I could have never done it. Never. So many mothers stood up and helped me out because they knew I was in this mode. And I honestly, I think we can find all kinds of support that we don't think exists around us. And people are so nice, especially other mothers who know your situation. So don't hesitate to ask. I'm sure there are many avenues for us.
I think we're almost out of time now, so I hope you'll join me and on behalf of the DEI committee in thanking our panelists for an incredible event. I personally learned a lot as someone who is currently pregnant. Your advice has been very encouraging, and you've made me feel a lot better about what's going to happen the next few weeks. So thank you so much for sharing your experiences, sharing your research with us, and your unique point of view. I think on that note, we can start moving towards the end of the session. And thank you to all the audience members as well for joining us today. I hope that you got an opportunity to really reflect and learn some interesting advice and can apply that in your lives. Thanks, everyone.